Hello and welcome to Keep the Bastards Honest, the podcast of the Australian Democrats. I'm your host, Elana Mitchell, and on this episode, we take a long look at the Coalition's nuclear fantasies. With everything that's been happening over the last month or so, you'd be quite justified in having completely forgotten that Opposition Leader Peter Dutton finally announced his much-promised and long-awaited policy on nuclear energy in Australia. If you recall, Dutton spent months spruiking nuclear and dropping hints about the policy, and then making promises as to when the details of the policy would be released, only to shift the goalposts on us repeatedly. They finally released an uncosted policy on the 19th of June. At the time of recording, we're still waiting on official costs. I suspect we'll be waiting for official costs for this policy for some time, considering the entire nuclear debate has been superseded, firstly by Labor Senator Fatima Payman crossing the floor and then being forced to resign from the Labor Party, Joe Biden having a devastatingly poor debate performance against Donald Trump, Trump being shot at, and then Biden stepping down as the nominated US Democrats candidate in favour of his Vice President Kamala Harris, and then the Olympics, all of which also contributed to the publishing of this particular podcast being much later than I had anticipated. It's worth revisiting and doing a deep dive into Dutton's nuclear policy now that the initial reactions and theatrics have passed from the media cycle, because it deserves scrutiny. Dutton isn't proposing an alternative pathway to net zero by 2050 and the decarbonisation of the economy. He's proposing that we can avoid having to make the journey down the decarbonisation pathway at all by embracing nuclear power, which is quite radical when you think about it. It begs the question if we can avoid having to transition our economy, our industries, essentially our way of life to a low-carbon future by embracing a technology that's been around for 50 years, but also avoid cooking the planet. Why aren't we already doing it? The obvious counter-question is, if this is genuinely a feasible solution, why didn't the Coalition do anything to implement it in the 9 years they were in government leading up to 2022? But let's not muddy the waters with logic. My always excellent co-host, Steve Beatty, did the research, so you didn't have to, and join me for a look at the Coalition's proposed solution to our energy and emissions needs. We pay our respects to the traditional custodians of the lands upon which we recorded this episode, and their elders past and present. Sovereignty never ceded. Steve, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and head desk with me about nuclear.
My absolute pleasure. And what a way to spend an evening unpacking the Coalition's nuclear announcements. I hesitate to call them plans because it feels like we need more detail to really give it that sort of moniker. But let's talk nuclear.
Yeah, oh God, where do we start?
Well, I was thinking that we might begin with what problem are we trying to solve? So what's the actual problem that we're trying to solve? We've got an announcement from the Coalition around a plan to build a series of nuclear power stations in Australia, which we'll get to, and we'll talk about the sensibilities of that. But what problem are we trying to solve? And in a nutshell, over the next 12 years, Australia plans to retire something in the order of 16,000 megawatts of coal-fired power generation in New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, and WA. South Australia no longer has any coal. They retired their last one in 2016. Tasmania hasn't had them for a long time, if they had them at all. And the Northern Territory doesn't have any either. They're reliant on gas and solar. So it's those. But you've got things like the Eraring power plant, which is the largest in the country, being retired now, 2028. It's been extended by the New South Wales government. That's the largest. Bayswater in New South Wales, Vales Point, you've got Callide B and Gladstone, and the two reactors at Toorong and Toorong North in Queensland. Loy Yang in the Latrobe Valley in Victoria, and the Yallourn Power Station and then 2 in WA, both in the vicinity of Collie in 2027 and 2029. So we've got this series of retirements of significant amounts of energy generation that are being retired, and we need to replace them with something else. We need to retire them because we need to cut our emissions, and we've set a national goal to move to 82% of our energy needs being supplied by renewable energy sources. And that's sort of rooftop solar, utility scale solar, wind, batteries, and hydro, right? Like that's kind of what we're talking about. So the question is, over the next 12 years, how do we build 16,000 megawatts of new energy generation? And the coalition has said, we've got a plan, we're going to build 7 nuclear reactors, and that's going to do the job. So when we retire those coal-fired power stations, we need to maintain the integrity of the national electricity grid, right? So as a transition, and the Australian Energy Market Operator, AEMO, has their integrated system plan, which talks about this transition. What is it going to look like? What's the order that we do things? All of that kind of fun stuff. And it needs to maintain its stability. We can't have blackouts. We don't want power spikes. We don't want price spikes. So we need sort of price stability. We need energy stability, and we need the stability and reliability of the grid during this period of significant phase down of coal-fired power. That's what we're talking about. Now, the coalition in response to that has said, we've got a plan. We're going to build 7 nuclear reactors in 7 of the locations where a coal-powered power plant is being retired. And they named it the 7, and they're in the Hunter Valley in New South Wales, prime wine growing region, but what a place to plonk a nuclear reactor. Lithgow, just west of the Blue Mountains, about 2 hours from Sydney. Latrobe Valley in Victoria, Gladstone in Queensland, Toorong in Queensland, which is just northwest of Brisbane. Again, good place for a nuclear reactor. Port Augusta, just southwest of Adelaide, or west of Adelaide, I guess. And Muja in WA, which is near Collie and near a coal mine that's being retired. Those are the 7. Now, of the 7, they haven't sort of indicated where they'd start. They haven't kind of indicated what type of nuclear reactor they want to build or any of those sorts of things. They've really only told us so far that the first one would be up and running by 2037. That's where we are in a nutshell. Let's take it from there.
If a Labor opposition had put forward a proposition so lacking in detail and so lacking in actual, as you said, what is the problem we are solving, they would have been absolutely crucified in every sphere imaginable, from the scientific community through the media. Whichever party was in government would have absolutely crucified them. The fact that Dutton has been given the slightest bit of credibility over this is genuinely astonishing.
Yeah, it's being treated as a serious proposal. And if we think about what do you expect from a serious policy proposal, it needs some evidence or some basis in fact, some evidence that it will actually deliver on the outcomes that it needs, and some alignment with where we are currently as a nation. He might as well have announced that we'll source our energy from space. Because we're roughly as close to harvesting solar energy from space as we are building a nuclear capability on Earth. We have exactly 0 of the capabilities that one would list out. We may even be closer to space exploration than we are a nuclear industry to generate the sorts of power that we're talking about. Like we're nowhere near it. But look, let's tackle the first sort of major issue first, which is the timing of these reactors. So Peter Dutton has said that they would have the first one up and running within 12 years, which is by 2037, if they're elected at the next election. So 12 years, start to finish, beginning with an environment that is legislatively against nuclear at a federal, state, and local level in all 7 of the locations planned for a nuclear reactor. So nobody currently has an environment that says we would welcome a nuclear power plant should you choose to build one here. So there are hurdles legislatively. Let's put it in those terms.
It's
In most of the locations that we're talking about, we've got Labor governments. So at a state government level, you've got the other party rather than your party that you might work with. And the Queensland Liberal Party, and I think the Victorian Liberal Party might have done the same thing, they've already come out and said, yeah, look, we're not going to support a nuclear industry in our state. So there are issues there. But the real kicker for me is the fact that even if you could get a nuclear power plant up and running by 2037, and it's only the first of the 7 that they've planned, that is years after we've started the process of retiring that coal-fired power. So the process of replacing that power is ongoing. It's been ongoing since 2010, really, where we've been retiring coal-fired power capacity, generation capacity, and we've been replacing it with things like rooftop solar, utility solar, wind farms, batteries, hydro, and the like. And we've been switching off our coal-fired power plants. As I said earlier, South Australia has gotten rid of all of theirs. They got rid of their last one 8 years ago. So before we even get a nuclear power plant, we've had 12 years of closures. And as I said, by the time Dutton's first reactor might be up online, all things going according to his plan, we're 16,000 megawatts short of the generation capacity that the country requires today, let alone with a growing population over the next decade and a bit.
Yeah, so it's like even if nuclear was viable, both legislatively, environmentally, economically, politically, all the other lees that I can't think of right now, just the timing is like the laws of physics are not going to bend sufficiently to allow nuclear energy to come online in time to handily take over from the coal-fired power stations that are going to be retiring.
There's a good
And
decades gap.
and that's before we even get to the bit where if you want to build the nuclear reactor on top of the site where the coal-fired power station is retiring from, I'm not an engineer, but as someone who has deployed solutions in a technical environment, I wonder how it is that you're supposed to retire the coal-fired power station and dig a nuclear reactor in at the same time, or whether you actually need to shut down the coal-fired power station before you can clear the site and build your nuclear reactor.
So in practical terms, because this is one of the question marks, and we'll call them question marks rather than further evidence of fantasy, but one of the question marks around the plan is that, yeah, you would need to retire the plant first. You need to disassemble it because it's a very different thing. And then you begin construction of your nuclear power plant. So if I look at the first station that's due to retire that's on their list is the Muja site in WA. So that retires in 2029. Assume that you start to do some planning straight away. You've got 4 years while it gets retired to get your ducks in a row. And then, as soon as it's retired and it powers down, you start deconstructing it, getting rid of any contaminants and all the rest of it, and then you begin construction of a nuclear power plant. Well, that's several years. And that's several years from 2029, given that you were able to, or assuming that you were able to overcome all of those legislative hurdles in the first place, such as a nationwide ban on nuclear energy. You've got to get through that before you can even break ground, but you can't break ground until 2029. Something else worth pointing out, though, at each of these sites, they're not government owned, they're privately held. So you would have to buy them from the private company, which is a choice that they get to make. And in a lot of cases, these private companies have plans. So energy companies like AGL have indicated that they'll use their sites when they retire the coal-fired generators and turn them into large-scale renewable generators and make use of the transmission infrastructure that's there, which makes perfect sense. So a wind farm or a solar farm, on-site battery storage, make use of the transmission infrastructure and keep using that location as energy generator. Like, that's the same thinking behind sticking a power plant there. The difference is that I can decommission a coal-fired power plant and get a utility scale battery and solar farm up and running within 12 months.
Yeah.
Not a decade if all goes according to plan. So the timing of the plan just doesn't work out when you start to dig into the details of it. And as I say, that's the earliest that they could possibly commission. So 2029 is the first one. Maybe they accelerate some of those plans and they go, well, we're going to force the sale of the sites from private companies. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. Maybe they can accelerate that timeline. At which point you run into the second question. And the second question is simply, how long does it take to build a nuclear power plant, all things going well? And we've got some recent examples of when things have gone well, or how do things typically go when countries with nuclear industries try and build nuclear power plants. The UK, which has an established nuclear industry, is in the middle of doing one at the moment. Hinkley C is nearing completion. It has suffered a number of delays over the years. The cost is going to end up being about 50% higher than it was originally estimated, and it's going to come in, give or take, 50 billion Australian. It will have taken 16 or 17 years, I think, to be built from start to finish. And critics of the plan sort of point to various governments mismanaging the project and large infrastructure being something that big government or governments don't do well, all of that kind of stuff. And remember that point, because we're going to come back to it. Do governments do large infrastructure well is going to be a recurring theme in this conversation. Another recent project was in Georgia where they built, I don't know how to pronounce it, but Georgia built 2 reactors on the same site that were commissioned in 2023 and 2024. They were also late. They were also over budget. I think they were 7 years late in the end. They were significantly over budget. I think they came in roughly double the original estimate. They also came in around $50 billion. I thought it was more like 45, and I posted online about this fact that these Georgian reactors came in at 30 billion US, and a councillor or a representative in the state House of Reps in Georgia corrected me and went, no, you're forgetting the penalty that we paid Westinghouse to walk away, which was $3.7 billion. We basically said, look, you can leave and here's some money, and we're really, really sorry to have messed you around.
Oh my gosh.
And somebody else was brought in. It may have been Fujitsu, as a Japanese company was brought in to finish the project. But it's funny that online, someone from the House of Reps in the state of Georgia came along and said, yeah, sorry, Steve, but you're actually out by nearly 4 billion US. So that one was 51 billion as well. Combined, it produces only about 2,400 megawatts.
This is something
right? So these are not significant amounts.
Yeah.
It's equivalent to a large-sized coal-fired power plant, but it's 2 reactors on the one site. We're building 7 in total, and on average, a large nuclear reactor generates about 1,000 megawatts. So to replace what we're actually losing in coal, if we were going to do it with nuclear, we would need 15 or 16 reactors, not 7. Now, maybe we build 15 or 16 on 7 sites, but that's not part of the plan so far. And some of these sites don't have the transmission capacity to do that anyway.
Wow. Okay.
So that's a completely other issue. That's just an engineering issue. That's not even a timing issue. That's just an engineering issue, right? But so far, the experience around the world is essentially that it takes a long time to build one of these things. Now, the counter argument is France. In the 1970s and 1980s, France built 55 nuclear power stations that are mostly still running and generate something like 70 or 80% of the nation's energy. And it's pointed to as a success story. So they built these quite quickly. They did them all at once. It was a response to the oil crisis in the 70s. And France really, because it didn't have its own oil industry, felt that they needed to hedge their bets and nuclear was the way to go. So they did this massive construction project and they managed to do things quite quickly, and those things are still running. That's not the case today, and it's definitely not the case in a country like Australia. We don't have any nuclear technology, really. I mean, we've got Lucas Heights that turns out nuclear medicine, and we've got a couple of cyclotrons at fancy hospitals, but that's about it. The idea that we might replicate what France did in the 1970s is kind of fanciful, but that's the theme of this podcast. So,
because I know that the coalition has pointed to a nuclear reactor that was recently finished in the United Arab Emirates and was completed in 13 years. And they're sort of pointing to that as, see, it can be done. And I mean, okay, they are technically correct, which, as we know, is the best
they
form
are.
of correct. However, the United Arab Emirates is not an equivalent nation to Australia. So granted, they also,
There's a few differences. Yep.
there's a few differences, yeah. I think the only thing we literally have in common with them is the fact that they, I believe, and I could be wrong here, this might be a walk of shame, but my understanding is that this was their first nuclear reactor, and so they too are building a nuclear industry from scratch. But the UAE, it's not burdened with pesky details like a functioning democracy. It's a
No.
kingdom. And so it doesn't have the same government or kind of government that we do. It's not particularly burdened with environmental protection laws, occupational health and safety laws, labour laws, everything that people point to in Australia as being one of the things that makes Australia one of the best countries in the world.
Yep.
The UAE is not burdened with any of that.
It is not.
And that has probably contributed to why they were able to get a nuclear reactor built within 13 years. I have to admit, I have not done and it's not that I have not done the research, but also I've not done the research because I don't think there's a lot of actual information out there about this particular reactor. And so there's no information as to how many people died making it, because it's
For
possible
example.
For example, yes. And I'm, not casting aspersions because I literally do not know because that information is not available. But so to point to the UAE and go, see, it totally can be done. It's like, well, sure. If you toss out entire swathes.
All of the democracies. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. So all of the pesky democracy and safety stuff. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And incidentally, the consortium that I believe funded that reactor is now actually $100 million debt. So it's probably not been terribly commercially successful.
Does not surprise me at all. It cost about 35 billion Australian, but it's big. It's twice the size of our biggest coal-fired station. It's 4 large reactors that have been brought online in the one location. So that's a big thing, and roughly at a cost of about $9 billion per thing. So, but you're right, it comes within an environment that isn't really replicable in Australia. And the engineering in the Emirates versus in places like the Hunter Valley or Lithgow or Collie or Gladstone is quite different as well, let alone questions around safety. Gladstone, for example, sits on the Great Artesian Basin. And, we all want to see nuclear waste leak into the Great Artesian Basin, for example. So there would want to be some environmental protections looked into for some of these sites. But again, the criticisms of the plan mount up long before you need to look at things like environmental protections and whether or not it stacks up. But when you do, nuclear energy is really, really water intensive. It's massively water intensive. It would so a single reactor would use up the entire flow of the Murray-Darling Basin for the better part of a week each year of operation. It would take the entire flow of the Murray-Darling Basin for a few days. So no one else gets anything, just so that we can run one of the nuclear power plants that they're talking about. Now, in a location where you actually have some water, like Gladstone or maybe the Hunter Valley, that's okay. Port Augusta, though, doesn't really have the same. I mean, it's got salt water, but that's a different proposition. Collie, not so much. Some questions, right? Like, just how do you source the volume of water needed to run these things? They are much more water intensive than coal-fired energy. And we're not blessed with a lot of water in this country, especially in places like, rural regional Queensland and regional New South Wales. So there's that. And again, there are plenty of issues before you get anywhere near that aspect of it.
Yeah. The thing that gets me about this is it's clear it's sort of suddenly being presented like it's this fantastic new technology that we just hadn't considered up until now.
Yeah,
Maybe we should.
maybe we should.
Now that the Facebook team, well, actually the social media team as a whole, went a little bit to town on this issue when it got
Good.
mentioned. And someone on our Facebook, and the thing I find interesting is that people who are pro-nuclear, they're really pro-nuclear. Like it's quite startling. And someone sort of came to us and said, well, a lot has changed since 1998 when the federal ban on nuclear was introduced. And now that I've had sort of time to think about that and percolate on that, it's like, has it though?
Has it? Has it really?
Yeah, because nuclear technology, in a lot of ways, hasn't changed that much. Like,
No, not really.
we've not had any massive nuclear technology breakthroughs in the last 30 years.
No, not really. Not really.
And the one thing that we've really, really not managed to solve is the minor technical detail that the radioactive waste produced by these reactors still has a half-life of 700 million years.
Yes, which is a long time.
It is.
It's a long time. And apparently you kind of need to put in place storage plans for at least 1 million years to be on the safe side. Now, we tend not to store things for 1 million years. And the place that you would think to store something safely for 1 million years is in places like deep underground where our water sits. And in a continent like Australia, I think I might have mentioned this earlier, it is not something that you want to mess around with. Like, we don't want to poison the Great Artesian Basin. We don't want to poison the catchment of the Murray-Darling Basin. These are just things that we should try and avoid as much as we can. And yet these are inherent risks in a nuclear industry. Peter Dutton said the other day that the spent fuel issue is being overblown, that a nuclear reactor produces a Coke can worth of nuclear waste a year. If a Coke can weighs maybe half a kilo, depending what's in it, but probably more like a third of a kilo, he's out by a factor of about 35,000. 35,000 Coke cans worth of.
Yeah, because I saw a quote from Amy Ramikis on Twitter saying that it's actually like a Coke can of nuclear waste per person. And so he'd be looking at 26 million Coke cans of waste per year.
Right. Which is different. I have
to fact check that, but
it's different.
It's
tons,
vastly different.
It's tons and tons of radioactive waste each year that needs to be stored for millions of years. And we don't actually have that kind of technology anyway. We don't have the technology that allows us to store something for 1 million years. And most of the countries that have a nuclear industry pretend that that's what they're doing, but they're not really.
Yeah.
If we're going to start doing it, we want to be able to do that well. We're just not in a position to do it. Now, granted, Australia is good in that it has a pretty stable geological environment. We're not prone to big earthquakes. We're not prone to fault lines the way other countries do. We don't tend to have volcanoes, which would inconveniently spew our radioactive waste up out of the ground and into the air. Like that kind of stuff that you get in other countries. We're not going to get tsunamis necessarily because these sites will be away from the coastline. So all very safe and good. However, we would still need to find a way to store that waste for a long time. And it's questionable whether or not that effort is actually worthwhile.
And I mean, if there was literally no other option, like if our options were cook the planet, render the entire planet inhospitable to human life and other biota, or find a way to store nuclear waste for millions upon millions of years. Sure, let's get our best minds onto this.
Find a way,
dig into that and sort it out.
Absolutely.
But I mean,
we have option.
Yeah, I mean, God, we probably have a better chance of getting carbon capture and storage actually working.
God, yeah,
finding a way to storing radioactive waste safely for 1 million years.
So here's the other thing about this plan. And I say the other thing as though it's the only other thing, but it's really not. It's just one other thing. By the time the first nuclear power plant comes online, and let's say that it's in 12 years' time, we will have had to increase our energy generation from renewables to the tune of 16,000 megawatt hours because that's what's retiring between now and that time. And the way that happens is in a very distributed way. So rather than really concentrated energy generation like we have today, these sort of big single points of energy generation, spitting out 2,000, 2,600 megawatts from one location, big transmission lines into substations that then spits it across the city landscape. Instead, we're going to have millions of rooftop solar panels. We're going to have hundreds of thousands of commercial buildings with solar on the roofs. We're going to have solar farms dotted across the landscape. We're going to have individual wind turbines all the way through to large wind farms, both onshore and offshore. That distributed network, that decentralized network of energy generation points requires a shift in the way we architect our national energy grid. It becomes a very decentralized grid, which requires very different technology and transmission architecture. Many more transmission lines, much more firming infrastructure, switching infrastructure, the need for things like batteries to firm. There will be a role for gas-fired power in the interim and hopefully only for a few years, but that's a question mark even for the market operator, is how long gas is needed and what that role looks like. But you end up with this decentralized grid. So the use of these really large single points of energy generation disappear. And that's a good thing because we also move into an environment of increasing climate instability, more storms, more disruption from things like floods and fires, more sort of severe weather events that take out power lines, all of that kind of stuff happens. So a decentralized energy network is a really good idea in the context of being resilient to an increasingly chaotic climate. And then the coalition wants to put back in place one of these massive, or these sort of 7 massive single points of energy generation into a grid that has spent the last decade moving away from that architecture. It doesn't make a lot of sense. All of the pieces that will be in place, the grid that a nuclear power plant would be delivered into would be a fundamentally different beast to what we have today.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. That's a really good point.
It won't be
It's not
viable
really
within
compatible.
that context. It won't be compatible. And this is one of the points that the CSIRO made in their Gen Cost report, although it got lost in the conversation around cost. But the architecture of our energy grid will change, and with it will go the need for these large single energy generators. What you'll end up with instead is the need for firming capacity, and firming capacity will come in the form of batteries, it'll come in the form of hydro, and it will come in the form of gas where those other options aren't available. That's going to be the thing. And there'll be a lot more of them at a smaller scale so that they can be resilient in the face of those fluctuations.
Yeah, because people do forget that the goal is net zero emissions by
Sure.
2050. And net zero is not completely zero. What it means is that, we may have a tiny bit of gas left in the electricity system,
Yep.
tiny bit to provide that firming and that resilience.
Yeah.
But it is then offset by all the
Or the other
non-emission
thing.
producing stuff that
That's
we're
right.
doing.
The estimates are that gas accounts for only, 2% of energy needs. It's just that those 2% are delivered at very specific and strategic times to make up for fluctuations in the renewables. I think the other thing that people don't quite wrap their head around when they talk about renewables being unreliable is that renewables are like a crowd of 1,000 people talking and 1 or 2 people being quiet and then talking again. There's always noise.
Yes.
There's always noise. Somewhere there's always noise, right?
That's a
And
really good analogy.
right, and sometimes people will be quiet and sometimes people will be very loud, but there's always noise. And the question is, how do you moderate that noise to be consistent? But there's always noise.
Because the other thing that Australia is relatively geographically stable. I mean, we have had earthquakes,
Oh, we
and when
do.
we have
We
them,
have
they
we
tend to
have
be,
hundreds each year.
well, yeah,
We actually have hundreds each year, but
yeah,
they're minor. Generally, they're
they're
minor.
tremors. But so the pro-nuclear people have, because when you mention, Chernobyl or Fukushima, they get deeply offended and go,
They
"Well,
do,
Fukushima was this once in a,
sure.
there's this one-off event where you had a tsunami that flooded the reactor and terrible things happened." And it's like, "Oh yeah, because Australia doesn't flood,
Australia doesn't flood ever,
and
right?
ever
No.
no, Australia's not prone to bushfires or other catastrophic natural disasters in the very areas in which you want to build a nuclear reactor."
So we are prone to things like fires, we are prone to drought, which would do interesting things to a construction like concrete. Concrete has a tendency to dry out and crack when there's no moisture around. You've got to do something about that over the long haul. But even if you assume all of that goes well, the construction goes flawlessly, the regulation is there, like all of those sorts of things happen. Ignore the timing, ignore the need for the waste disposal, all of those questions. Let's set all of that aside for a minute and then go, what does it deliver in terms of energy capacity? And what does it cost us? And might there be a better way?
I
And
did
it
some very
turns
rough.
out the answer is yes.
So I did some really rough sums because, it appears that on average, these new reactors that people have, when I say people, I think other countries have built, they seem to be averaging out at around, say, let's say 50 to $60 billion Australian per reactor.
Yeah.
So, and let's just pretend that inflation and construction costs aren't a
Don't
thing.
exist. Yeah.
I rounded it up to an average of, say, $60 billion per reactor just to take into account that. That works out at over $400 billion
You
to
could
build
get
these
some really
things.
good submarines for that price.
You could you ever? Like we could get extra submarines. I mean, could we get an extra 7 submarines and plug our major cities into them?
Just connected a bloody big cable. Now that's out of the box thinking. And then we simply unplug it in the event of war,
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
when no one's going to complain about a blackout in a major city
No,
anyway
no.
because emergency.
I mean, if my memories of World War II are correct, you needed to shut down all the lights anyway so cities can't get bombed.
That's
So,
true.
unplug
Yeah.
the sub, go to
Yeah.
war,
Go to war. Yep.
no
And in the
electricity in the city
meantime,
anyway, but it means that no one's turning on a light and accidentally giving away positions. It's perfect.
it's beautiful. Yes.
Yeah, I'll add
So
that to
you
the
could
defense
do it that
policy.
way. You could do it that way. That's one way that you could do it. It turns out that for less than 1/10 the cost, because I got bored and checked, for less than 1/10 the cost, you could build wind or solar with battery backup. So is both emissions free, renewable, firmed, all of the things that you want from this for 1/10 or less the price
Wow.
of building nuclear reactors. And those things would be, they can be deployed at a smaller scale. So your average nuclear reactor is 1,000 megawatts. Your average wind farm is, or wind turbine is one. So
Right.
for a smaller cost, and this is the other thing, is that an individual wind turbine and infrastructure or a small 1 megawatt solar farm and battery, those things can be deployed, like you can deploy 1,000 of them in different locations and have that resilient to the climate in a way that you just don't have with one single thing, where a bushfire that takes out a power line and the whole thing's screwed. So build
Yeah.
smaller ones. You can build them close to communities. So this is the other thing. You can have a wind turbine, a solar farm, a communal battery near a regional town, near a rural town, near a mining operation, etc. And you can just build the 1 megawatt, 2 megawatts, half a dozen sort of thing. Like you can scale it much more readily than you could nuclear reactors, even small nuclear reactors. These small modular reactors are still sort of 300 megawatts. They're still
Mm.
quite substantial. And that's the size of Colling. So Colling in WA is our smallest coal-fired power station that's being retired over the next 12 years. It's 340 megawatts. It's equivalent to a small modular reactor in terms of its output. But that's still quite large in terms of what would a town of 1,000 people need? Well, doesn't need anything like that.
No, it's true.
It needs a small wind farm and a small battery.
Yeah. And just to be flippant for a second, because this just occurred to me and I'm deeply amused by it, that kind of distributed independent power generation, I think would really, really come in handy in the zombie apocalypse.
It would.
Because in
Yeah.
all the zombie movies, as
Yeah.
civilization collapses,
Yeah.
you lose things like power and water and stuff because these big generating thingies fall to pieces because they don't get maintained and all this sort of thing.
Zombies are also attracted to nuclear energy, I've seen. They have a tendency to seek out the nuclear power plants.
Really?
Yeah, maybe I'm just interpreting the movies differently, but they do seem to go there.
That's a good point. Yeah, depending on which movie you've watched. But, when we start rebuilding civilization, perhaps civilization wouldn't collapse quite so badly if regional towns and things had independent power supplies.
Yeah, they still got Wi-Fi and Spotify. They'd be okay.
We joked on our budget podcast about you becoming Jim Chalmers' speechwriter. We really do need to get onto the Albanese government with some of these ideas.
Yeah. It's some of these ideas. Yep. Yeah. Especially how do we design Australia to withstand a zombie apocalypse? Well, the distributed energy network should be high up on the list.
It would be a compelling argument, I think. Because
more compelling than the plan for nuclear.
Well, yeah. Because renewables have become such political football. Yeah. And then we can reshape it in terms of, well, who's going to protect you from the inevitable zombie apocalypse? Well, it's not going to be the coalition. They're probably going to cause it with their nuclear reactors.
And then hide behind their gated communities.
Exactly.
Look, some of the other arguments around the need for nuclear energy generation in Australia talk about the fact that we will need additional capacity as the population grows. We will need some degree of baseload energy generation, this kind of stuff. And that's sort of this argument for we need something big just to provide the foundational bit of energy that we're always going to need through the day. The reality is already, though, in most Australian jurisdictions, that rooftop solar plus our utility solar and wind on those good days, really sunny days, really windy days, already supply over 100% of our energy needs. On those days, base load power pays us or pays the government to continue operating so they don't have to go through the process of shutting down. That's happening already, let alone when we've built out our wind farms and we've built out our solar and we've built out our rooftop solar further. But this is talking about current technologies rather than the possibility of future technologies. So if I start to think about what are some of the future technologies and where are those landing, I was reading something just this morning that there's been a development in battery technology using iron as the base metal rather than lithium. Now, that's a good thing for a range of reasons, but Australia happens to have a lot of iron. We've got a lot of lithium, but we've got a lot of iron. But this technology has the potential to increase battery storage capacity, solid state battery capacity, 100 times. Wow. So if you think about the Tesla battery storage, that 100 megawatt battery in South Australia, which is quite substantial, it's the size of a football field kind of thing, it would be one of those units rather than 100 of those units that are currently sitting there. It would be one of those units providing that same capacity. So when you start to think about, well, what would that do to our energy grid? What would that do to the capacity of our energy generators? So during the course of the day, when rooftop solar really outperforms and is generating way more energy than households need when they're feeding it back into the grid, those batteries can be powered. And then through the night, or through the winter months or whatever it might be, they can feed energy back in. That's one technological development. There's another one that's coming out of Scandinavia, and I can't recall whether it's Norway or Finland that's been working on this, but they've developed a storage technology that uses superheated sand. I don't know whether you've seen this one, but it's very, very cost effective, but essentially you use renewable energy. So your wind and your solar, when those things are working, and when they're generating excess capacity, you feed it into this system that superheats sand and stores it at up to 1600 degrees inside a container. And then it gets used to do things like heat water, heat the air, but it can also be used to boil water and run a generator to generate electricity. So it can be used to heat, so warm houses, warm water, do that kind of stuff, or it can actually be used to generate electricity again.
So the whole boiling water thing, it's kind of, and sorry to stray off topic here, but it's kind of like how a nuclear reactor works.
But using really hot sand instead, right?
Instead.
Yeah. It can store that energy as heat in the sand for months.
Wow.
Once it's charged. So again, if you think about a place like Scandinavia, short summers, long winters, the days fluctuate in terms of their length quite severely, really long in the summer, really short in the winter. The ability to store up energy in these sorts of devices and then use it through the winter for heating water and that kind of thing is massive. But these are really cheap units relatively. They're not expensive and the technology is fairly simple. Prototypes of those, the first commercial prototypes of those devices are already available. So unlike the iron-based battery, which is science at the moment rather than an actual thing, these are out in the wild. They're actually there.
Wow.
The
So
last
also
one that
unlike SMRs, because they are
unlike
also,
SMRs, right?
yeah.
Yes. The last one that I want to mention, which is also on the science being on the verge of commercial availability, solar panels that work off reflected moonlight.
No way.
So the moon reflects sunlight,
Yeah.
right? But it's weak sunlight, but it's reflected sunlight. These are solar panels that will do both, that will draw some power, not as much, obviously, but they will draw power and generate electricity during the evening when the moon's out.
Wow. So that solves the whole when the sun doesn't shine
When the
problem.
sun don't shine, when the wind don't blow, thank God we've still got hot-aired politicians to turn our turbines. No, we've got those sorts of technologies that are sort of proof of concept today and being commercialized over the coming decades. You sort of look at them versus, well, should we go down the path of a nuclear industry, which doesn't fit in with the architecture of our energy market, is against us philosophically and ideologically in terms of we don't want nuclear technology in Australia, we don't want nuclear waste in Australia. Certainly, we don't want them in those locations. And something else that we haven't mentioned, but the likelihood is that we wouldn't store the nuclear materials next to the nuclear power plant. We would have a storage facility probably in the Central Australian desert somewhere because that's just how we think.
Yeah.
So you would have to get spent fuel from Hunter Valley to the Central Australian desert. You would have to get it from Port Augusta to the Central Australian desert. You'd have to get it from Gladstone to the Central Australian desert. And that's a transport risk that every one of those journeys is a couple of 1,000 kilometres of spent fuel rods moving through populated areas and farmland and the rest of it, and any kind of accident would be catastrophic.
Yeah.
So as I say, like the technologies that are available and coming on the renewable side of things suggest that maybe we don't need to spend tens of billions of dollars on energy industry that doesn't exist in this country and doesn't really play to our strengths, where we have no capability.
That's incredible. My fellow Vice President Graham Elder did a deep dive into nuclear small and medium reactors, and so he wrote a brilliant article on it, which is on our website, and I'll link to that in the show notes. I turned it into a podcast because I enjoyed it so much, and it's me reading his article with sort of editorial commentary because
Awesome.
being the excellent researcher that he is, he had a ton of links to references and sources and that sort of stuff.
Good.
that didn't translate so well into an audio format, so I had to supplement a
Okay.
little bit. But one
Yeah,
of the
good.
things that I found fascinating with his article, and Dutton has sort of come out and said, we'll have, depending on which is more suitable, whether it be a conventional reactor or an SMR, we
Yeah,
will have one of those. So he proposed an SMR for Collie, which, considering the size of the Collie reactor at Mujar, kind of
fair enough.
makes sense. It's kind of
Maybe.
equivalent.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, as much as this whole thing makes sense, the asterisk. But apart, so yes, Steve just sort of waggled his fingers at me in a very audio friendly sort of
Fair
kind of
quote.
way.
Yeah.
So, but the thing that I found really interesting, so there are currently, so the first one we have to stress is that there is small and medium reactor technology is not yet commercially feasible anywhere in the world.
No,
The
we
one
couldn't get one if we
attempt,
wanted one. Yeah.
no, precisely. The closest that have come to a commercial facility was in the US, and it got cancelled last year due to the skyrocketing cost of it. It became commercially unfeasible because it was too expensive. So there is a prototype reactor in China,
Hmm.
and then there is another SMR in Russia.
Right.
And and this is not mentioned in Graham's article specifically, but I allude to it in the podcast on this, is that the Russian one is is actually a miniaturized version of the RBMK reactor, which is the reactor that caused the Chernobyl meltdown.
Oh, okay.
So this idea
That's
that
fine.
SMRs,
Better.
like they're a nuclear breakthrough and there's this new sexy technology that we can just deploy, it's a little bit of a furphy. So I sincerely hope that with the miniaturized version that they solved the really terrible design flaw that caused the Chernobyl meltdown.
Sure.
But I'm not going to be rushing to get one of them installed in Australia. The Chinese one, I have to admit, I've got no idea what's happening with it. I'm not even sure if it's operational. So when Dutton made this announcement, he actually presented an artist's impression of
Yeah,
what
I
a
like
small
that.
medium reactor looked like, which he had ripped off from the Rolls-Royce website because they were planning on building an SMR, like a factory to build these things. That factory, incidentally, has been cancelled because they can't work it out. So, I mean, you're talking about renewable breakthroughs that are on the cusp of becoming commercially
Actual.
viable.
Yep.
Granted, a couple of them are still in the realm of science, as you put it, but
Sure.
they are probably more feasible than nuclear fusion or
Mm.
small and medium
Yep.
reactors.
Yep.
But Dutton is essentially proposing vaporware.
Yeah.
I
Let me just highlight the fact that we're not going to go and ask China for help building an SMR in Australia, right? So if the only working SMR is in China, then we really don't have an avenue to get one working. We're not going to go to China and ask them to make one for us here.
no,
And China is unlikely to say yes anyway. But let's be realistic. We're not going to reach out and sign an agreement with China to build a nuclear reactor in Australia.
no,
Even were we to contemplate such a thing, our allies would have a stern word with us that perhaps that was not in our best national interest and certainly
no.
not in theirs. So please stop.
Yeah.
Um,
If we were like trying to get involved in our telecommunications rollout,
oh, no way. There's
surely
no way we're
let's
letting
give them
them near
access
a
to our
nuclear
energy
industry,
grid.
right? There's not a chance in hell that we would let them near it.
If we went down that path, we could just cancel the subs from the US and give that
Well,
money to
we could get
China.
Chinese. We could get Chinese subs
That's right.
to protect us from China,
As they build out our nuclear reactors.
right?
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. Hey,
Sorry.
two other things. We were talking about technological breakthroughs in the renewable energy thing. One of the other challenges, particularly for commercial buildings, is the lack of real estate on which to put solar panels. So, a commercial building, particularly office buildings, so it's a little easier on warehouses and industrial buildings where you've got these big sloping roofs and you can put solar on top of those. That's fine. Your average office tower, even small ones, don't really have the real estate, and that rooftop real estate is typically used by mechanical and engineering type stuff. Your lift well coming up to the ceiling, your air conditioning ducts, your air conditioning units, that sort of stuff sits on the roof. One of the other technologies that I just want to mention that is in commercial production now and the price is dropping, it is a transparent solar panel that can be applied over windows like a tint.
Oh, like a film.
So just like your car, which has tinted windows, it is essentially a tinted film that would fit over office windows that would generate energy from solar.
Wow.
Now, that is something that is in commercial development. That's not vaporware. That's not an engineering prototype. That is something that is being rolled out. So you can see through it, just like a tinted window in your car. You can see out through it. It generates electricity and it can cover the entire side of a tower. The cost is currently a little bit on the expensive side, so you won't see it everywhere, but that cost is coming down all the time, and it will become, and certainly in the timelines we're talking about, it's like 12 to 15 years, the cost of doing that kind of stuff will become such that it is a no-brainer on commercial buildings.
Wow.
The other thing that I just wanted to point out in Dutton's plan, we've spoken about some of the other issues about it, but the one that I want to just come back to now is the idea that he's been putting forward that the government would build and pay for these.
Yeah.
And the government would own them. So essentially, we're talking about the nationalisation of Australia's energy grid after years of privatisation. Here's Peter Dutton, arch conservative, arguing for a nation-building nationalisation of the energy grid, to the point where he's been saying we will override the states and their objections, we will override local councils, we will force the sale of these assets so that we can get control of them. This is full-on nationalisation on a scale that was mocked when Dan Andrews announced the Victorian Energy Commission 18 months ago. That idea of them building out a renewable energy generator, like state-owned energy generation using renewable energy for Victoria, that was panned as communism. But here's Peter Dutton proposing effectively the nationalisation of our energy grid.
Yeah, and I wonder, is that even constitutionally viable? Because there's a reason why it was the states that built the energy corporations and had control of energy generation.
Yep.
Before it was all privatised. And even the original Snowy Hydro scheme, that was a joint venture between the federal government and the New South Wales and Victorian governments. That was
right.
not federal. It
That's
only got
right.
up because Victorian New South Wales
went in.
So, yeah, let's just do a quick ticking off of all the hurdles that Dutton has to overcome. So, number one, he has to abolish the federal ban on nuclear energy.
Which is pretty tightly held. Yeah.
Very, very tightly held.
There's a lot of opposition to it. Let's be honest. Yeah.
And that's the thing, like in order to do that, Dutton would actually have to, let's assume he was a majority government, so he'd be able to get it through the House of Reps.
Yeah.
He would actually need control of the Senate to get it through the Senate. And the last time any government had control of the Senate was in the 2004 to 2007 administration, which ironically was his political hero, John Howard. So the chances of Australia giving Dutton control of not just the House of Reps but the Senate at the same time is slim to nothing.
The thing is, let's just pause there for a minute. The thing is that because we only have half Senate election, he won't get it in 2025 anyway. Even if the coalition has a massively successful election, he will still have the likes of half a dozen Greens and David Pocock and Jackie Lambie and the other Lambie senator, whose name escapes me, all against him.
Yeah, so it would be 2028, so provided that he continues in his barnstorming popularity contest.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, he would have to wait until 2028 to get control of the Senate, hypothetically, in order to overcome the federal ban. He would then need to convince the Queensland, New South Wales and Victorian state governments to overturn their state-based nuclear bans.
Or change the constitution to override their right to do so.
Just the irony of constitutional reform.
I know, right?
Considering how successful the last referendum was.
To overturn a nuclear ban. Yep. Go Ducks. Yep.
Well, and also just considering Peter Dutton's role in how successful the last referendum was, for
Indeed.
him to then have to fight a referendum to
Yes.
to,
Yes.
to overturn the state's right
Yes.
to ban stuff like
Yep.
nuclear.
Yes.
And I have to admit that I was actually deeply offended on behalf, and this was
Mm.
strange to me, but I was deeply offended on behalf of politicians because when he got asked about this in his press conference, he quoted Paul Keating and said, "Don't get between a state premier and a bucket of money," which implied that he was
Wow.
perfectly willing
To just
to
throw money at
to
them.
just throw money at all the state premiers until such time as they gave in and allowed a nuclear to be built in their states. Which, I mean, our podcast is called Keep the Bastards Honest. The party's tagline is Keep the Bastards Honest. But again, just,
That kind of thing is frowned upon around here. Yes.
yeah. But it's just the blatant, not only is he willing to essentially bribe his state counterparts to let this through, the assumption that they would then accept the bribe is, I think,
Yeah.
deeply offensive to our
Yeah.
democracy.
It's unclear at that point whether or not the local council bans would stand. So
This is true, yeah.
I live in an area that has all around me has a nuclear ban in place such that nuclear materials aren't allowed to pass through the suburb,
Oh, wow. Okay.
right? And the only exemption of that is in place for nuclear medicines. So when
Wow.
you receive radiotherapy, those radiotherapies are produced using a cyclotron and they are transported from wherever the cyclotron sits to the place where you're receiving your radiotherapy. Now, typically, a major hospital will have a cyclotron on hand if they do a lot of cancer treatments because they want to minimize the amount of transportation that needs to take place. So, not a lot of it takes place anyway, but a lot of local councils have that ban in place. All
Yeah.
of those would need to be overturned or made unconstitutional. None of that happens quickly. So
No.
all of that is just the regulatory bit. We were working through a list, and that even that part has taken several minutes.
Yes.
What else stands in his way?
Provided as Australia has a momentary lapse of reason and supports all of that, gives him full power of the federal government. State governments roll over and either get bulldozed or essentially accept a bribe.
Brought
Then
out. Yep.
local councils, and that's interesting. Also, when you were talking about the issue of transporting the waste to our
Yep.
mythical nuclear waste dump, that's something else that we would then have to overcome. What else was there? There's the timing,
Then there's
yeah.
the timing.
All of those legislative and constitutional hurdles would probably end up going to the High Court. And so, again, that
They
is
would
something.
absolutely be challenged as far and wide as they could be at
Yeah,
every level of possible challenge.
yeah.
Every single one of them would be challenged. Yep.
So that alone, it would probably take a good 10 years to sort all that out, to give them the green light to go ahead. Because my understanding, and I could be wrong, this could be a walk of shame because I'm not a lawyer. So we were talking earlier about the Collie Station being the
Yeah.
first to be decommissioned, and that would probably be the first one that we could actually start planning for. My understanding would be that you literally can't start planning for a nuclear reactor until all the bans and stuff is gone, because planning for that reactor would be an illegal act.
Quite possibly. The thing is, it turns out that the West Australian government already has plans for Collie. Being the good government that they are, they've been working on plans to transition the local economy away from coal and coal-fired power generation for several years. They're looking at a range of tourism ideas, a range of diversification opportunities for local economy. How do you attract different jobs? Like state regional development teams have been in there for a good 5 years.
Mm.
They already have plans. The local communities have plans. There's a lot of work being done building out things like mountain bike trails and hiking trails through the forests near Collie. A whole range of stuff has been done. So this wouldn't be planning. This would be upturning years of planning in order to foist a whole new plan onto a community that didn't ask for it. And that's going to be the case in every one of these locations.
Yeah, that's the other really important point is we only touched on it briefly before about the fact that all of these sites are privately owned and the site's owners all have plans for them. And one of the things when the announcement was made, the Guardian made a point of they actually reached out to the people that owned Port Augusta.
Oh, yeah.
The owners of the Port Augusta site said, well, not only have they not been contacted by the Liberal Party about this,
yeah,
they have plans of turning their site into, I think it was a renewable energy and critical minerals
of course,
factory.
right? Which makes a whole lot more sense in a place like Port Augusta, right?
Yeah.
It absolutely does. Produce green hydrogen and ship it overseas out of a huge industrial port. That makes perfect sense. You've got the desert right there where you can build out large-scale renewable infrastructure and do it safely. You've got the port infrastructure there where you can do things like ship hydrogen overseas quite readily, and you can use it locally to do things like produce green steel. Whyala's not far away, so you can tie in with that local industry. Whyalla has plans for green steel already. They're looking at how they generate the energy that they need. These plans are happening. Hunter Valley, again, I've got a good friend whose PhD thesis is around how the Hunter Valley community transitions away from coal into other things. That's a 4-year thesis that she's been working on. These things are well and truly underway. These communities are well and truly on board. They understand the need to shift away from coal. They understand the opportunities that all sorts of avenues open up for them. The idea that you're just going to step in and go, no, don't worry about any of your plans. We're going to put nuclear energy in your backyard instead. The wine growers of the Hunter Valley aren't going to have some concerns about a nuclear power plant in the Hunter Valley, one of the best wine regions in the world. It's daft.
Coming back to our timeline, so assuming that it's 2028, he's finally got control of the Senate, he can overturn everything he likes.
Yep.
By the time he gets through all the constitutional challenges in the High Court, he potentially has to conduct and win a referendum to override the states' rights around their bans, gets through the High Court challenges. All of these sites are going to be shut down. They're going to be redeveloped. They're going to be thriving industries on those sites. And this is the other thing. He claims to have had advice, legal advice, that the Commonwealth can actually go and just forcibly acquire these sites.
And he's probably right.
Well, legal Twitter said, I would love to see that advice.
But look, let's say that he's right. Imagine the political capital that you would burn going out into communities like Gladstone, which is absolutely critical to your political survival in federal government. Forget the Hunter Valley or Lithgow because they're going to lean Labor anyway. But Gladstone is one that you absolutely have to win. You're going to go into a town like Gladstone and say, look, I know you've got plans, but we're going to force you to go down this other path instead.
Two things that really made it clear that, this doesn't even deserve the dignity of being called a thought bubble. But the first one was, I think it was Keith Pitt, who, when asked what was going to happen in the interim while they were spending 10 or 15 years building these reactors, he got asked, well, what's going to plug the timing gap between these coal-fired power stations shutting down and nuclear reactors coming online? Because as you said, there's probably going to be at least a decade in between.
It's a problem. Yep.
It is a problem. And it just went, well, we're just going to have to extend coal, which kind of belled the cat on what the purpose of all this is. And then the other, I think it was Ted O'Brien.
Oh, yeah. The architect of the plan. Yes.
That's right. When he was asked...
Apologies to the architect. Yeah.
Yes, I know. Yes, you have you've disparaged architecture. He said that they would first of all have to win the next federal election, which is by no means assured, but then they would have to then go and consult with communities. And that's going to take a couple of years, at least. So your first term in government, this is probably why Dutton is waiting for this tsunami of popularity that he's surfing to then give him the Senate in 2028. You probably have 2 or 3 years of community consultation across 7 different locations across the nation. Because again, it comes down to like if all of these communities turn around and tell you to get stuffed and you will implement a nuclear reactor in their backyard over their dead bodies, why would you then go out and spend all your political capital overturning bans and referendums and high court challenges and everything else? Like, you kind of need to get the communities to sign off on it first. And
Yeah.
so you're looking at probably the early 2030s before you can actually look at doing any kind of planning or anything.
Yeah. 82% of the Australian energy generation capacity will be renewable by 2030. So by
Yeah.
that stage, by the time you get your ducks in a row to actually begin, and I still think you're being optimistic that it could be 2030, and I think you're being optimistic that he wins 2 terms in government and gets a majority in the Senate, and it's a fundamentally changed energy market and energy grid by the time that happens.
Yeah.
It's just not the same equation. I'm sorry, but the concept of baseload power generation will disappear. It will just disappear. The energy grid will be far more decentralized. It will be far more localized in that time frame, that sort of 5 to 10 year time frame. It will be far more decentralized than it is today, to the point where baseload energy will be operating most of the time as a loss. It will be paying the government to stay on so that they don't have to go through the pain of shutting down.
Yeah.
Every single coal generator will be operating at a loss by that point. And into that environment, the government is going to spend tens of billions of dollars putting in baseload generating capacity, which most of the time operates at a loss. Like, it's not going to
Yeah.
happen.
No.
It's just not going to happen.
And it's not just tens of billions. Like, you're looking at probably by the time it all happens, like as if it's going to, but again, we're operating on a fantasy here.
Yep.
You're looking at probably $500 billion. And
yeah, it's starting to become real money.
Yes. And this is the thing, like this is why nuclear power is the single most expensive form of electricity on the planet. This is what I find interesting is that in the last 30 years, so you look at from the evolution of renewable energy solutions, so solar, wind, batteries, hydro, that sort of stuff. You look at that evolution over the last 30 years, it's been extraordinary. The technological breakthroughs, not just in terms of the reduction of costs, but the evolution of its efficiency, its ability to be scaled, it's everything.
Right.
It's from the late 90s to today has been almost like an industrial revolution unto itself, right?
Yeah.
Then you look at the nuclear industry, nothing has changed. Technologically wise, nothing has changed in 30 years. The closest they've come to, like, there's been no breakthroughs in nuclear fusion or any of the other thought bubbles and vaporware that they keep talking about. Like,
Fusion's
nuclear
only 10 years away. Fusion's only 10 years away.
Yeah.
I tell you.
It's been 10 years away for the last 40 years.
It has been.
And this is what I find interesting is that the cost of nuclear has not gone down, and in fact it's probably risen. And there's been no evolution of the underwriting technology on any level.
And it's still unsafe, and it's still water intensive, and it's still radioactive, and all the rest of it. Right?
Yeah. And because and talking about the transport thing, I mean, I think it was, I'm pretty sure it was Rio Tinto. It could be another walk of shame. I'm clocking them up on this podcast.
Yeah.
But they lost a little radioactive button in the middle of nowhere.
They did. It was either Rio or BHP, but one of them did, right? It was a big...
It was a huge thing. And we were really lucky that it was in the middle of nowhere, that it literally fell off the back of the truck in one of the most barren and inhospitable sections of WA. And the whole country nearly melted down over it. The whole state nearly went into lockdown of a different sort over it.
It's not a small thing.
No. I mean, ironically, it was a very small thing because it took them 10 days to find it, but thankfully they did. But that was a serious risk. Can you imagine transporting spent fuel rods?
Tons of them?
Tons of them.
And that's the thing. I get tons of them. It's not a button. It's tons of them. Yeah. Look, I think at the end of the day, we have better options. We've got a better plan. The step change plan from the AEMO's integrated system plan is a good one. It sees us reduce our reliance on coal-fired power and gas-fired power over the next decade quite substantially. It sees the use of renewables increase markedly. It gets us to something like 95% renewables by 2035. It's a good plan. It can be done, I think, for $122 billion is the current cost estimate for that transition. That's not a lot of money. Certainly, it's cheaper than the nuclear power option, which doesn't actually get us there. And it's feasible within current technological capabilities. We can do it with stuff that we've already got, with our current batteries, with our current hydro, with our current solar and wind capabilities, without us even tapping into more interesting renewable technologies like wave generators or geothermal power or those sorts of things, which are feasible in Australia, but we just don't need them because of our sun and wind capability. We've got better options. This is the bottom line. We've got better options. We've got options that deliver stable, reliable, and cheap energy using technologies that are available, reliable, and well defined, that deliver us an energy grid that is resilient in the face of climate change and localized weather events, which is what we're going to need them to be, and deliver ultimately cost savings to individual households, especially if they take the step of electrifying their appliances inside. So if they shift away from gas heating and cooking to electric heating, cooking, air conditioning, those sorts of things, solar panels on the roof, a battery pack to back it up through the night, households will save thousands of dollars a year, will reduce our emissions, will be more reliable. That's an available plan, an achievable plan, something every household and community can act on today. This fantasy of building nuclear energy is farcical.
The simple reality is that they have no intention of building nuclear power plants. The whole point of this nuclear fantasy is to delay and destroy the renewable transition.
Yeah.
That's literally.
We haven't really talked about that, but ultimately it feels like just a delaying tactic. We need to keep the coal going so that we've got the transmission thing. We shouldn't invest in a distributed or a decentralized transmission network because we're not going to need it. But if we don't need it, we're not bringing renewables online, which means we need to keep our coal fired. And it's working. Those delays are working. It's why Eraring is currently being extended for 3 years at a cost of hundreds of millions of dollars to the people of New South Wales. It's working. And we really need to stop.
Yeah, and it's ironic because, I mean, we haven't even touched on the absolute failure of the media in all of this. That's probably a subject for another podcast. But this announcement has been, by those journalists who are actually doing their jobs, they've sort of gently mocked it in the sense that this is very courageous in the yes minister sense of the word. And the irony is that a genuinely courageous option would be to actually bunny hop this whole thing, like just go over the top of where the government, that the Labor government is at the moment, and just dive straight in and go, you know what, not only will we support this transition and speed it up, rather than spend $500 billion on nuclear, we'll spend a tenth of that paying for every household in Australia to have solar panels and batteries, and we'll pay for the electrification of the country with the money that we'll save by not going down the nuclear energy path. And you'd probably get control of the Senate if you did that.
Yeah. I think this is one of the things, we've got much better plans. The Rewiring Australia plan that was put forward by Saul Griffith, which has a lot of detail to it, is a fraction of the cost. I think it averages out at about $20,000 per household, but it saves $4,000 to $5,000 per year per household. So it pays for itself in 4 or 5 years, which is not the case with nuclear energy. It takes much, much longer to pay back. But that's at current levels of production. So the thing that Saul admits is that he's unclear on what might occur if you ramp up the industry in terms of cost savings. So if you ramp up induction stovetops, if you ramp up microwaves, if you ramp up electric hot water systems, if you ramp up battery and solar installations, to convert every household in Australia rather than the ones who are willing to do it, but you do every single one. You know, we've done on their own 2.5 to 3 million households have converted and put rooftop solar in. We need 10 or 11 million. So, you know, like, and his point is costs will come down. The cost of those individual appliances will come down. But the other thing that is tucked away in there, which is just an interesting side note almost, is that once you start to think of individual appliances as potentially being energy storage units, not just energy users, so you have a small battery in every appliance, then during the day, that helps you store your solar energy. And during the evening, your house can act as an energy network and draw upon the stored energy in your microwave and the stored energy in your kettle and the stored energy in your television if they're not using it to run things like the air conditioning to keep the house cool during the evening or keep it warm during the evening. Like, you no longer have this idea of everything is plugged in and everything draws power. You start to think about things differently. So we've got a step. And then you can start to think even more around, well, what does smart energy use in the home look like? But as I say, like you think about these things and you keep coming back to the idea that nuclear energy just does not make sense. There's not a single point in favour of it really in Australia. About the only thing that you would say it has going for it is the potential for really large consulting fees for the engineers and management consultants who'll be asked to do feasibility assessments. There's millions of dollars on the line for those guys who will all reach the conclusion that it's a bad idea, but in the meantime get some, really lucrative fees to say so.
So I know that, we have been accused by pro-nuclear people as of being out of touch and ideologically stuck in the past and too deeply attached to our anti-nuclear stance. And we have been encouraged to go and look at the evidence. We have. And granted, Graham only looked at SMRs, but this conversation has been deeply reassuring to me that I'm not going crazy in my... What on earth are you talking about response to people when they say that nuclear is an inevitability and we just need to get on with it?
No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. And look, my final point will be that when you look at the sort of energy grids around the world that rely heavily on nuclear as their source of energy, and the best example is France. France is heavily reliant on nuclear energy. It has low costs for its citizens because they paid for it 50 years ago, so they don't have to pay for it today. But it really only works because France gets to export any excess energy to its neighbouring countries who are reliant on fossil fuels and happily accept France's cheap nuclear energy instead of them burning oil. In the absence of those neighbours, France's grid architecture wouldn't work. So if you did the same thing here, where we don't have neighbours, you would be in difficulties. The other thing that I would say is that France is on the cusp of having to make a decision to replace a lot of that nuclear capacity. They're 50 years old and they will have to be replaced. And the idea that they will replace them with nuclear energy is something that I question. I don't think France is even looking to do it.
No, because I read somewhere, and as usual, I cannot remember where I read it, but I was under the impression that of the 55 reactors that they built 50 years ago, only 30 odd are still running. They do seem to be in an active transition out of nuclear. Germany has transitioned out of nuclear completely. And so the instances of new nuclear being built, either in countries that already have nuclear industries or ones like the UAE that decide to just create it out of whole cloth, it's really minor. And I think there are more nuclear projects being cancelled, again, because of cost and logistics, than there are being delivered. And again, the ones that are being delivered really, really late and 2 or 3 times the original estimated cost.
That's right. Look, I'm all for political parties being innovative with their policy. I'm all for them thinking outside established norms and all of those sorts of things. I think it's wonderful when parties do that. But policy really does need to have a more solid foundation than this one does. And it's created a lot of discussion around a topic that really doesn't warrant it. It's drawn attention away from, if anything, it's drawn attention away from the fact that Australia is not going to meet its rather lackluster 43% emission reduction target. We're not going to meet that, and we're not talking about it. We're talking about nuclear energy instead. We're not on track to actually hit our 82% renewable energy target by 2030 because the transmission grid is not being upgraded in the way that we need it. We're not talking about that either. And this is the downside of these issues being treated as political issues rather than policy issues, is that they become this sort of game of attention seeking and controlling narrative rather than serious policy debate. This one really isn't a serious policy proposal, and it's worth deconstructing it, but it's really not a serious proposal. It's vaporware.
So just to wrap up, Amy Ramikis from The Guardian, at the time all this was announced, did actual journalism.
Yep.
And ironically, we still don't have answers to any of this stuff.
No. And we probably
a couple of weeks
won't.
down the track.
We probably won't.
No. So we don't know how much it will cost. We don't know what reactors they would use. So we don't know if they're going to be large conventional or small ones. We don't know how they would purchase the privately owned coal stations.
Correct.
We don't know how they would overcome state objections. We don't know where the waste would go. We don't know how they plan on building 2 of the reactors within the 2035 to 37 timeline. And we've already established that that's not actually achievable.
Yeah.
We don't know where the funding would come from. Who are we going to tax to do all this stuff?
No.
There's been no serious consultation with communities. And there's been no serious research undertaken with the site. So There was one great Twitter thread that I saw from someone who was intimately involved in the development of the Khalid site, I think it's in Queensland.
Yeah.
And keep in mind that Khalid, I think, that was the one where the station actually exploded. But he explained in detail why Khalid is geographically unsuitable to hold a nuclear reactor. And it's literally the way, like the ground, I think, is too rocky or it's hilly. Like
whatever
it's
the
not,
reasons are, like it's sure.
It's not good. So there's been literally no assessment of the sites to work out if you can literally physically engineer a nuclear reactor there.
No.
And I guarantee you, we will never get answers for any of those things.
The frustrating thing is that all of that stuff, including the simple thing of just the feasibility of the engineering on that particular site, should be simple. But I think it goes to show, we saw this for 9 years when the coalition was in government previously, is that they tend not to approach problems as policy problems. Pretty much everything is a problem of politics. And this is another example in opposition of them approaching an issue from the perspective of politics rather than serious policy.
Yeah.
It's been great to see the response from the independents. It's been great to see the response from the Greens. They've been quite reasonable in how they've responded. And this is an issue where they've got like a really firm ideological position on. It's just like no nuclear. It's as simple as that for them. And that's been good. And they've been quite adamant about it. But the various independents, David Pocock in the Senate, the community-backed independents across the board, have all had solid, nuanced positions about a nuclear industry in Australia, which has been really good to see. And most of the responses from the groups that I've just named have been more detailed and more researched than the policy position from the coalition in the first place.
Yeah,
and I think
crazy,
that should be a source of embarrassment, but won't be.
Yeah.
But it should be. Opposition should be putting forward real policy positions that contrast with the government, real alternatives for how to go about solving some of the nation's problems. It's a responsibility of opposition that they do that kind of thing. And unfortunately, once again, we've got the coalition behaving in a policy vacuum and treating these issues really at a political level rather than a more serious policy level.
Yeah, because if they were not so blinded by their ideological hatred of anything renewable related, they would have solid ground to be holding the government to account on the fact that we're not going to hit our 2030 targets.
Right? Like, focus there. Focus
Yeah.
there. Like, it's a
You
problem.
know,
It's a real problem.
yeah,
The 43% target was weak in the first place. The Democrats called it out as being weak. We called it out as being at risk of not being delivered on anyway because the mechanisms that would drive it didn't feel strong enough, didn't feel reliable enough. The policy environment wasn't robust enough to make it happen. And it's been borne out, it's not there. Attack them on that. Dive in there and talk about that kind of stuff. Talk about the lack of action. Talk about the fact that we're still getting land clearing and biodiversity loss and that the reef is at risk. That 95% of the barrier reef is subject to bleaching at the moment because the ocean temperatures remain at record highs for the last 18 months. So all of those things are things that you might pick up and talk about from a serious political point of view and from a serious alternate government point of view, like a real opposition. We're just not getting it. We're getting into sort of the territory of politics rather than policy, but unfortunately, it's where the coalition tends to operate.
yeah.
And their policy positions tend to be these really weak efforts to drive attention rather than serious policy proposals. And this is one of them.
Yeah, no, it's almost the post child for the vapidness of what the coalition offers the nation.
Yeah.
Which is, really unfortunate. So thank you, Steve. That was a very enjoyable session of head desking.
Look, it's always a good time, Elana. It's an area that we have to take seriously. It's an area that the country needs really serious thought to go into. We've got some great experts around energy in Australia. We've got some great experts and some really interesting thinkers in terms of the use of renewable and the potential for renewable energy in this country. And unfortunately, they're being sidelined by these sort of ideological thought bubbles that are political in nature rather than really sort of policy focused. I appreciate the opportunity to have the discussion as always.
Something to keep in mind is that when Dutton announced this policy, even his long-term unquestioning backers in the News Corp and Seven West media camps called him out for the lack of detail around how much these 7 reactors would cost and where the funding would come from, which is quite remarkable considering their usual habit of running coalition talking points as if it were actual news, or fact for that matter. And I have to admit, when I first asked Steve to come head desk with me on this, I never anticipated discovering just how much our energy architecture and environment was not suited to and realistically can't support a transition to nuclear energy. I mean, it can't support it now, never mind a hypothetical decade from now, when Dutton has overcome all the electoral, regulatory, commercial, geographical, social, and political hurdles he needs to overcome in order to implement the scheme. And this really is the crux of the issue. We've just spent 90 minutes absolutely destroying a policy put forward by the leader of a coalition of parties that are seriously asking the electorate to treat them as serious contenders to form our next government. And this is the level of policy rigour they think is acceptable. It's genuinely astonishing. The Democrats are in the middle of a mid-election cycle review and update of our policy platforms, and the chief challenge the policy team is constantly battling with is this feasible? Is what we're putting forward as a solution supported by evidence, and could it be implemented if it was adopted by a government? We're not a party of government. Hell, we're not even a parliamentary party at the moment, however much we'd like to change that. We do not have the policy expertise and resources available to us that the major parties do. But I can guarantee you that every single one of our policy platforms has been examined, debated, challenged, and is better researched than this absolute nonsense fantasy that Dutton has spent the better part of 12 months putting forward. Politics is the art of the possible. For every single problem that this country faces, if we were to try and build a legislative solution for that issue from scratch, every single politician from every single political party in this country would say to you, well, we wouldn't start here. Every single politician has to work within the framework of everything that's come before them and try and put forward a solution to a problem that's actually feasible within the legislative and political framework that they're forced to work within. Which is why nonsense like what Peter Dutton is putting forward is so insulting. He's making it fundamentally clear that he thinks the electorate are idiots. He's treating everyone with the slightest desire to make this country a better place with absolute contempt. And the fact that the coalition is the slightest bit competitive in the opinion polls, imperfect and possibly unrepresentative as they are, is an absolute indictment of the Labor Party and their government. Because they are treating us with only slightly less contempt than the opposition. That's a very long way of saying, be curious. Question what your elected representatives are telling you, including those who wish to be your elected representatives, like us. If the last federal election taught us anything, it's that we don't have to accept the eternal status quo and the intellectual decline of the two-party system. We can refuse to accept this kind of nonsense from those who seek to represent us. And we can also demand better of them. And we should. Keep the Bastards Honest is brought to you by the Australian Democrats. This episode was edited and produced by me, Elana Mitchell. If you'd like to keep in touch, you can find us on Facebook, the platform formerly known as Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, Spoutable, YouTube, and TikTok by searching for Australian Democrats. And you can see what we stand for, what we value, and what our policy positions are at our website at democrats.org.au. Email us at info@democrats.org.au. Until next time, thanks for listening.